June 1943. A German U-boat crew, captured after their submarine was sunk in the Atlantic, arrived at a dock in Norfolk, Virginia. They were exhausted, traumatized from the sinking, expecting to be treated like prisoners in a defeated nation treats its captors. Instead, American guards handed them sandwiches, real sandwiches, white bread, actual meat, fresh lettuce, more food than they'd seen in weeks aboard their submarine. One German sailor, Oberleutnant Hans Goebeler, stared at the sandwich in disbelief. He later wrote, "I thought it was a trick, some kind of psychological operation. They were feeding us better than we fed ourselves when we weren't prisoners. Nothing made sense." Then they were loaded onto a train. Not a cattle car, not a military transport. A regular passenger train with cushioned seats. The guards weren't brutal. They were polite, almost friendly. One American guard offered cigarettes, American cigarettes, high quality. As the train moved through the American countryside, the German prisoners pressed their faces against the windows. What they saw shocked them more than the battle that captured them. Cities with lights blazing. No blackouts, no bomb damage. Factories with smoke pouring from chimneys operating at full capacity. Cars, thousands of cars on the roads. Regular people, civilians, driving personal automobiles like it was peacetime. One prisoner muttered, "We were told America was suffering under war rationing, that their economy was strained, that they were struggling to produce weapons. This is not struggle. This is abundance." Another prisoner said what they were all thinking. "We've been lied to about everything." This is the complete story of what happened when German prisoners of war reached America, the culture shock that shattered their worldview, the abundance that seemed impossible, the treatment that contradicted everything they'd been told, and the moment when hundreds of thousands of German soldiers realized they'd been fighting for the wrong side in a war they never had any chance of winning. To understand the shock German POWs experienced, you need to understand what Germany was like in 1943. And the answer is desperate. By 1943, Germany had been at war for 4 years. The population had been on strict rationing since 1939. Food was scarce. Meat was a luxury. Fresh fruit was a memory. Coffee was ersatz, made from roasted grain because real coffee was unavailable. Chocolate was for special occasions only. Clothing was rationed. You got coupons for shoes, for shirts, for everything. Most Germans were wearing worn-out clothes because you couldn't get new ones. Women were wearing dresses made from repurposed curtains or old tablecloths. Fuel was rationed severely. Private car ownership had essentially ended. Gasoline was for military use only. Most civilians walked or used bicycles. Public transportation was crowded and unreliable. German cities were being bombed regularly by British and American aircraft. Every major city had areas of rubble. Families lived with the constant fear of air raids. Blackouts were strictly enforced. Any light showing after dark could draw bombers. Factory work was intense. Men, women, even teenagers were working 60, 70-hour weeks to support war production. Leisure time had essentially disappeared. Entertainment was limited. Everything was subordinated to the war effort. And the propaganda was constant. Radio broadcasts, newspapers, posters, all telling Germans that they were winning, that the enemy was weak, that Germany's sacrifices would lead to final victory, that the Americans and British were suffering worse than Germans were. German soldiers believed this propaganda, or at least wanted to believe it. They'd been told that America was a decadent nation of jazz music and Hollywood movies, not a serious industrial power. They'd been told American soldiers were poorly trained and would collapse under German military pressure. Some German soldiers had doubts, especially after encounters with American military power, but most believed Germany was winning, or at least could still win. The propaganda was that effective. Then they became prisoners and were sent to America, and everything they believed shattered. The journey to America was usually by ship across the Atlantic. German prisoners expected harsh conditions, crowded holds, minimal food, brutal treatment. That's what they'd been told to expect from the barbaric Americans. Instead, they got regular meals, 3 times a day. Not gourmet, but adequate portions of decent food. Bread, vegetables, some meat, coffee, real coffee, not ersatz. Many prisoners hadn't tasted real coffee in years. Medical care. Prisoners who were injured or sick were treated by American doctors. The medical facilities on transport ships were better than many German military hospitals. Humane treatment. American guards were professional and largely non-abusive. There was discipline, but not the brutal treatment German propaganda had described. One prisoner, Wolfgang Kremer, wrote in his diary during the Atlantic crossing, Day 3 at sea. We are being fed regularly. The food is plain, but there is enough. Nobody has beaten us. The guards are stern, but not cruel. Either this is an elaborate deception, or everything we were told about American brutality was lies. I'm beginning to suspect the latter. But the real shock came when they reached America. The ships usually docked at ports like New York, Norfolk, or Boston. German prisoners coming from bombed-out European cities under blackout saw American cities blazing with light. Street lights, building lights, neon signs, cars with headlights, no blackouts, no fear of bombing. One prisoner later recalled, we sailed into New York Harbor at night. The city was lit up like a Christmas tree, millions of lights. I had not seen a city with lights on at night since before the war. In Germany, any light after dark was forbidden because of bombers. But here, the Americans lit their entire city without fear. That's when I first understood that the war was not going the way we'd been told. The Statue of Liberty, illuminated and visible for miles, became a symbol of this shock. Many German prisoners saw Lady Liberty and felt something strange, not just surprise, but a dawning realization that they'd been lied to about America. From the ports, prisoners were transported inland to POW camps. These journeys by train through the American heartland provided the most dramatic revelations about American power. The trains themselves were shocking. Not military transports or freight cars, but regular passenger trains, with seats, windows, toilets. German prisoners traveled in better conditions than many German civilians, but what they saw through those windows changed their understanding of the world. First, the infrastructure. Miles and miles of paved roads, thousands of cars, highways with multiple lanes, railroad tracks everywhere, with freight trains, hundreds of cars long-hauling goods across the continent.
One prisoner, Franz Mueller, wrote, we passed through a small American town, maybe 5,000 people. That town had paved streets, electric lights, telephone lines, and I counted over 50 automobiles. A town of 5,000 people in Germany might have 5 cars, all belonging to party officials or wealthy businessmen. But here, regular people own cars. Multiple cars per family. The wealth is incomprehensible. Second, the agriculture. American farms were enormous compared to German farms, and they were mechanized. Prisoners saw tractors, mechanical harvesters, trucks. German agriculture was still largely dependent on horses and manual labor. A prisoner from a German farming village wrote, I saw one American farm that was larger than my entire village in Germany. And this farm had 3 tractors, 2 trucks, and various machines I didn't recognize. One American farmer with machines works more land than 50 German farmers with horses. No wonder they can feed their military and their civilians both. Third, the factories. Prisoners being transported through industrial areas saw factories running at full capacity, smoke pouring from chimneys, parking lots full of workers' cars, no bomb damage, no destruction, just productive industry operating without hindrance. One prisoner who passed through Detroit wrote, we spent 3 hours passing through industrial areas, factory after factory, miles of factories, all operating, all producing. I counted over 200 smokestacks. In Germany, our factories are being bombed. Here, their factories operate without fear. They are outproducing us by magnitudes we cannot match. Fourth, the stores. When trains stopped at stations, prisoners could see through windows into American towns. They saw stores with goods in the windows, supermarkets with food, department stores with clothing, shops that were open and doing business. A prisoner wrote, at a train station stop, I could see a food store through the window. The shelves were full, full. Meat, vegetables, canned goods, bread, everything. In Germany, stores have empty shelves and long lines for basic rations. Here, in wartime, their stores are full. Fifth, the people. American civilians looked healthy, well-fed, well-dressed. Not the starving, struggling population German propaganda had described. One prisoner observed,
We were told Americans were suffering under war rationing, that their people were desperate and wanted peace. But I see American civilians who look better fed than German soldiers. The children are healthy. The adults are not starving. Nobody looks desperate. They look normal, like people living in peacetime, not wartime. The POW camps themselves continued the pattern of surprise. German prisoners expected camps like the ones they'd heard about: brutal conditions, minimal food, harsh treatment. What they got was completely different. The camps were usually built specifically to house prisoners. Wooden barracks with heating, electricity, running water. Not luxurious, but far better than many German military barracks. Prisoners received 3 meals a day, every day. The food quality varied by camp, but the quantity was generally adequate. Breakfast, lunch, dinner, regular meals. More food than many German civilians were getting at home. Medical care. Camp hospitals with real doctors, real medicines, real treatment. Prisoners who got sick or injured were treated. One prisoner with appendicitis received emergency surgery that saved his life. He later said, "The Americans operated on me, their enemy. With the same care they would show their own soldiers. I could not comprehend such humanity." Recreational facilities. Camps had sports fields, libraries, sometimes even musical instruments. Prisoners could play soccer, read books, form bands. There were organized activities, education opportunities. Some camps offered classes. Prisoners could learn English, study various subjects, even take college courses through correspondence programs. The ability to work. Prisoners could volunteer for work programs and earn small wages. They worked on farms, in factories, in various jobs. The wages were minimal, but they could buy small luxuries from camp stores. Religious freedom. Prisoners could attend religious services. Catholic and Protestant chaplains visited camps. Prisoners could practice their faith without restriction. Mail from home. Prisoners could write letters to families in Germany and receive letters back, censored but allowed. This maintained family connections. The Geneva Convention was followed strictly. Red Cross inspectors visited camps regularly. Complaints were investigated. The US government was serious about treating prisoners according to international law. For German prisoners who came from the brutal conditions of the Eastern Front, or from U-boats where men lived in cramped, dangerous conditions, or from any part of the German military where conditions were harsh, the contrast was stunning. One prisoner, Ernst Floter, who had fought in Russia, wrote, "I spent 2 years on the Eastern Front, cold, hunger, constant danger, watching friends die, living in dugouts and trenches. Then I was captured and sent to a camp in Texas. We had beds, 3 meals daily, hot showers. We played soccer in the afternoons. It was surreal. I was treated better as a prisoner in America than as a soldier in the German army." Another prisoner wrote, "My first week in the American camp, I ate more food than I'd eaten in my last month in the German army. I gained weight. As a prisoner of war, while my comrades fighting for Germany were starving. What kind of war is this where prisoners eat better than soldiers?" But the most shocking experiences came when prisoners were allowed to work outside the camps. Many POW camps were located in rural areas where there were labor shortages due to American men being in the military. German prisoners volunteered. They couldn't be forced to work, per Geneva Convention, to work on farms, in food processing plants, and in various civilian jobs. This brought prisoners into direct contact with ordinary Americans, and these interactions were transformative. Prisoners working on American farms saw the prosperity of American agriculture firsthand. One prisoner, Wilhelm Fischer, worked on a farm in Iowa. He later wrote, "The farmer I worked for owned 500 acres. In Germany, a wealthy landowner might own 100 acres. This was a middle-class American farmer. He had a tractor, a truck, a car, and a house with electricity, running water, a telephone, and a radio. His children went to school with other children who lived miles away. They were transported by bus. The farmer had more than my family in Germany had ever dreamed of owning. And he was not wealthy by American standards. He was average." Fisher continued, "The farmer's wife made us lunch every day. Real sandwiches with meat, cheese, vegetables. She gave us milk to drink. Fresh milk. She wasn't trying to impress us. This was normal for them. They ate like this every day. I realized the average American farmer eats better than a German officer." Another prisoner worked in a food processing plant in California. He wrote, "I spent my days packaging fruits and vegetables for distribution. Mountains of food. We packaged more food in 1 week than my entire village in Germany would see in a year. And this was just one plant. There were dozens of these plants. I understood then that American abundance was not propaganda. It was real. They had so much food they could feed their military, feed their civilians, feed their prisoners, and still have surplus. Prisoners also observed American civilians in their daily lives. Many were struck by the casual wealth that Americans took for granted. One prisoner noted, American workers at the plant where I worked drove cars to work, private automobiles. These were factory workers, not rich people, but they owned cars. In Germany, only the wealthy or party officials own cars. Here, ordinary workers own them. Some families had 2 cars. Another observed, I saw American children playing. They had bicycles, toys, new clothes. They looked healthy and well-fed. I thought of children in Germany thin, wearing patched clothes, playing with makeshift toys because real toys couldn't be manufactured during wartime. The contrast was heartbreaking. American women particularly impressed German prisoners. In Germany, women were being worked to exhaustion in war industries, often while raising children alone because husbands were at war. Food was scarce. Clothing was scarce. Everything was a struggle. American women, by comparison, looked healthy, well-dressed, and had access to goods that German women hadn't seen in years. One prisoner wrote, the American women working in the food plant wore nice dresses, had styled hair, wore makeup. They looked like they were going to a party, not to a factory job. German women were wearing patched dresses and had no makeup because cosmetics were unavailable. The Americans were fighting a war, but lived like it was peacetime. Social interactions also shocked prisoners. American guards, once they determined a prisoner wasn't a hardcore Nazi, would often talk casually with prisoners. These conversations revealed American attitudes that contradicted German propaganda. One prisoner recalled, an American guard asked me why Germany started the war. I gave him the propaganda answer about German living space, about the Treaty of Versailles, about Germany's destiny. He listened politely, then said, but you invaded other countries. You started bombing cities. How is that defensive? I had no good answer. For the first time, I considered that maybe Germany was not the victim of aggression, but the aggressor. Another prisoner had a conversation with a farm family during lunch. He wrote, the farmer asked me what I thought of America. I said honestly that I was shocked by the abundance. He laughed and said, this is normal for us. We've always had this. We're not suffering because of the war. Life is a little harder with rationing, but compared to what you've described in Germany, we barely noticed. Then his wife added, I hope this war ends soon so you boys can go home to your families. She said this with genuine sympathy. Our enemy felt sorry for us. It was disorienting. Religious German prisoners were particularly affected by American religious freedom and tolerance. One Catholic prisoner wrote, I attended Mass at a local church. The American Catholics welcomed me, prayed with me, treated me as a fellow Christian despite being their enemy. After Mass, families invited me to lunch. They fed me, talked with me, treated me with kindness I didn't deserve. I had been taught Americans were godless materialists. Instead, I found Christians who lived their faith more genuinely than many Germans I knew. But perhaps the most profound shock came from African-American soldiers and civilians. German propaganda had portrayed America as racially divided, on the verge of civil war, with Black Americans oppressed and rebellious. The propaganda wasn't entirely wrong about races. America did have serious racial problems, but the reality was more complex than German propaganda suggested. German prisoners interacted with Black American guards, Black workers, Black civilians. Many prisoners wrote about their surprise at finding Black Americans who were educated, articulate, and who treated German prisoners fairly. One prisoner wrote, I was guarded by a Negro soldier. German propaganda told us Negroes were inferior, uncivilized. But this guard was educated, spoke perfect English, obviously, was professional and fair. He treated us better than some German officers treated their own troops. My racist beliefs, taught by Nazi propaganda, crumbled when confronted with actual human beings. Another prisoner worked alongside Black civilians in a factory. He wrote, the Negro workers were skilled, efficient, and treated me with civility despite being their enemy. One man told me about his son who was fighting in Europe. His son was risking his life to defeat Germany, yet this man showed me no hatred. I felt shame for the first time about the racial ideology I had been taught. Some prisoners encountered black soldiers who had liberated concentration camps in Europe. These soldiers told the German prisoners what they had seen. One prisoner wrote, "A Negro soldier showed me photographs of Dachau, piles of bodies, starving survivors. The soldier told me, 'This is what your country did. This is what you were fighting for.' I wanted to deny it, to say it was propaganda, but the photographs were real. I had to confront that Germany had committed atrocities I could not defend. As months passed and prisoners adapted to life in American camps, many began to receive more reliable news about the war. The camp newspapers, controlled by Americans but allowed for prisoners, reported on war progress. Prisoners could listen to monitored radio broadcasts. Letters from home, though censored, conveyed the truth about conditions in Germany. The news was grim. Germany was losing on all fronts. Cities were being destroyed by bombing. Casualties were mounting. Food shortages were severe. The war was clearly going badly. But in America, prisoners were safe, fed, and treated humanely. The cognitive dissonance was intense. One prisoner wrote, "I receive letters from my family in Hamburg. They write, carefully, knowing censors will read, about hardships, hunger, bombing, fear. Meanwhile, I am in Texas playing soccer, eating regular meals, living in safety. I am a prisoner, yet I have a better life than my family at home. How can this be right?" Another wrote, "We hear news that another German city was bombed, thousands dead. Meanwhile, American cities are untouched. Their people live in peace. Their economy functions normally. We were told Germany was winning. But winners don't have their cities bombed to rubble while the enemy lives in peace and prosperity." By 1944, many German POWs in America had come to understand several truths. 1. Germany was losing the war badly. 2. American industrial capacity was overwhelming and couldn't be matched. 3. American society was not on the verge of collapse, but was functioning normally despite war. 4. German propaganda had lied about nearly everything regarding America. 5. The Nazi ideology they'd been taught was based on falsehoods. 6. Germany had started an aggressive war that couldn't be won. For some prisoners, this realization led to a complete rejection of Nazism. They became actively anti-Nazi, cooperated with American authorities, and some even agreed to work as translators or in other roles, supporting the American war effort. For others, it led to despair and depression. They had fought for a cause they now understood was evil and doomed. Friends had died for nothing. Their country was being destroyed for nothing. For still others, it led to cognitive dissonance they couldn't resolve. They couldn't accept that everything they'd believed was false. So they clung to Nazi ideology, even in the face of overwhelming evidence. American authorities recognized these different responses and worked to re-educate prisoners. Some camps had re-education programs where prisoners were shown documentary evidence of Nazi atrocities, given factual information about the war, and encouraged to think critically about Nazi ideology. These programs had mixed success. Some prisoners were receptive and changed their views. Others resisted and remained committed Nazis. But many were in the middle, confused, uncertain, gradually coming to understand that they'd been on the wrong side. One prisoner who went through re-education wrote, "They showed us films of concentration camps. I didn't want to believe them. I wanted to think it was propaganda, but the evidence was overwhelming. Testimony from survivors, photographs, documents. I had to accept that Germany had committed crimes I could not defend. I felt sick, ashamed, and angry that I had been lied to." The work programs also had a re-education effect. Prisoners working alongside Americans, seeing how American society functioned, developed appreciation for American values, democracy, freedom of speech, rule of law, individual rights. These weren't just propaganda talking points, but principles Americans actually lived by. One prisoner worked on a farm in Kansas. The farmer had a son fighting in Europe. Yet the farmer treated his German prisoner workers well, paid them fairly, and showed no personal hatred. The prisoner wrote, "This farmer's son is risking his life fighting Germany. Yet the farmer treats me with decency." I asked him why. He said, "You're a soldier who followed orders. You're not responsible for your government's crimes. And you're a human being who deserves to be treated humanely." This was American values in practice. I had never encountered such principled behavior. Religious influence also played a role. Many American church groups took interest in POW camps, visiting prisoners, providing religious services, offering comfort. For religious prisoners, especially Catholics, this spiritual support was meaningful. One Catholic prisoner wrote, "The American priest who visited our camp told me, 'God loves all his children, even those who have made mistakes or fought for the wrong cause. Your value as a human being is not diminished by your nation's sins.' This message of redemption and forgiveness was more powerful than any propaganda. It gave me hope that I could rebuild my life after the war." As 1944 turned to 1945, and Germany's defeat became inevitable, prisoners faced the question, what comes next? Some prisoners wanted to return to Germany to help rebuild. They recognized Germany would need committed, educated people to create a better society. They hoped to apply what they'd learned about democracy and American values to build a new Germany. Others didn't want to return. Germany would be devastated. Food would be scarce. Rebuilding would take decades. Some prisoners asked if they could stay in America. Most couldn't. They were required to return after the war, but some eventually emigrated back to America legally. A few prisoners worried about Soviet occupation of Eastern Germany. If they returned, they might end up in the Soviet zone. They preferred American captivity to Soviet occupation. By the time the war ended in May 1945, there were over 370,000 German POWs in camps across America. Their experiences varied by camp, by individual personality, by many factors, but most shared common realizations. America was vastly wealthier and more powerful than German propaganda had suggested. American society functioned well despite war. American values of democracy and human rights had real meaning. Germany had been fighting an unwinnable war. Nazi ideology was based on lies. They had been deceived by their own government. The return to Germany, beginning in 1946, brought new shocks. Many prisoners had been in America for 2 or 3 years. They returned to a Germany that was destroyed, occupied, starving, and traumatized. One returnee wrote, "I stepped off the ship in Hamburg and couldn't recognize the city. Entire neighborhoods were gone. Just rubble. People looked like skeletons. Children begged for food. I had been living in America with regular meals, heated barracks, recreational activities. I felt guilty for how well I had been treated while my countrymen suffered." Another wrote, "In America, I had learned about democracy, about human rights, about building a society based on law rather than force. I returned to Germany determined to help build such a society. Many former POWs felt the same. We'd seen an alternative to Nazism. We wanted to create that alternative in Germany." Post-war studies found that German POWs who spent time in America had significantly more positive views of democracy and American values than Germans who hadn't been POWs. Many became leaders in rebuilding democratic institutions in West Germany. The American experience of German POWs contributed to West Germany's successful transition to democracy. These men had seen democracy work. They'd experienced humane treatment under rule of law. They'd witnessed prosperity created by freedom and capitalism. They became advocates for Western values in rebuilding Germany. One former POW who became a mayor in West Germany said in an interview years later, "My time as a prisoner in America was the best education I ever received. I learned that there was an alternative to authoritarianism. I learned that societies could be built on human dignity and freedom. I learned that yesterday's enemies could become tomorrow's friends if they shared common values. These lessons shaped my life and my work rebuilding Germany." The shock German POWs experienced upon reaching America was profound and multifaceted. It challenged their worldview, contradicted their propaganda, and forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about Germany, about America, and about themselves. They expected to find a weak, divided, suffering nation, barely able to feed its own people while fighting a war. Instead, they found a confident, prosperous, united nation, operating at full capacity while maintaining high living standards. They expected brutal treatment as prisoners. Instead, they received humane treatment under international law. They expected to see evidence of racial civil war and social collapse. Instead, they saw a society with problems but functioning normally. They expected Americans to be soft, materialistic, and lacking fighting spirit. Instead, they found Americans with strong values, work ethic, and determination. Every expectation was contradicted. Every propaganda claim was disproven. And this cognitive shock led to profound changes in how these prisoners viewed the world. The most unusual sight for German POWs reaching America wasn't any single thing. It was the totality, the abundance, the normalcy, the humanity, the evidence that everything they'd been taught was wrong. One prisoner summed it up in a letter home, censored but aloud. I cannot describe everything I've seen. You must experience it to believe it. America is not what we were told. The war is not what we were told. I don't know what the future holds, but I know now that we were lied to about everything important. The truth is hard to accept, but accepting it is necessary if Germany is to have any future. That acceptance, painful, difficult, but ultimately transformative, helped shape the Germany that emerged from the ashes of World War II. A Germany that learned from its enemies, that embraced democracy, that became a peaceful, prosperous partner of its former adversaries. And it started with the shock of German prisoners reaching America and realizing that everything they believed was wrong. The abundance, the humanity, the normalcy, the truth. It was the most unusual sight for them because it revealed the most uncomfortable truth. They had been fighting for the wrong side in a war they never should have started, against an enemy they never understood, for a cause that was built on lies. And American abundance, American humanity, and American values proved it in ways that no propaganda could refute.